While there is considerable glamour attached to the position of seeker, for they are traditionally the best flyers on the pitch, they are usually the players who receive the worst injuries. Kenilworthy Wisp. The thirsty seek water, but water also seeks the thirsty. Jalal al-Din al-Rumi. Seek, and ye shall find. Matthew 7. I'm Dr. Geo Trevathan, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Edinburgh. But my interest in Harry Potter comes from something a bit more personal. I grew up in a family tradition of shamanism and spiritual practice in the Irish and Scottish traditions. And when I went on to the University of Edinburgh to research shamanism in Celtic cultures going back to the old Irish manuscripts, it was basically out of my own personal desire to find out what was left in the manuscripts of these ancient traditions and how that compared with what came down to me through my family. The Harry Potter novels came into my life at a time when I was going through kind of a difficult period, and I found myself reading them over and over again. I never wanted to read novels over and over again to the same extent, and so I started trying to do some research about them, as much to prove to myself or to understand myself, as well as to explain to my husband, who was saying, "Why on earth are you reading these again and again?" Why did I keep being drawn to them? What was in them that was bringing me back time and again? And I discovered that the Harry Potter novels are like all the great myths, is that they work on many different layers of meaning, many different layers of symbolism, and that there is actually a real depth to them beyond all the engaging narrative and the humor and the magic and the mystery and the suspense. There's something deeper beyond all of that that keeps bringing us back to Harry's story.
This is Edinburgh. This is the city where J.K. Rowling wrote the Harry Potter novels and where she lived her own fairy tale, the Cinderella story that a lot of people are familiar with, where she was a single mother and living on benefits and writing in the various cafes and in her flat in Edinburgh, writing the Harry Potter novels. And it's interesting that the novels that provided a bit of an escape for her have also provided an escape for a lot of other people. the Harry Potter novels weave together lots of different themes and lots of different kinds of genres of writing, whether it's the fantasy novel mixed with the fairy tale and mixed with that good old English staple, the boarding school novel. Behind me you can see Harriet's School, which is a very famous school in Edinburgh, and you can actually also see it from the Elephant House, from the windows of the Elephant House Cafe where J.K. Rowling wrote a lot of the novels. The boarding school novel is something that's probably less familiar in the States, but in Britain it's one of the ways that you can set up narrative tension right from the start, because you've always got different houses that are always vying with each other for winning the house cup or whatever it might be, and you've got the children sort of free from authority for a certain amount of time so that they can be free enough to get into a bit of trouble, as Harry and his friends often do.
I think we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. Follow.
I'm here at Edinburgh Castle during the festival, so there's lots of noise and activity going on, to talk a little bit about magic. Now here in the grounds of the courtyard of the castle is a place where many people were burnt at the stake, and here this plaque acknowledges the idea that some of those people may have been using magical powers for evil and some may have been using it for good. And that goes in line with what many traditional cultures say about magic, which is that magic is a morally neutral force, something akin to electricity, which can be used for good or bad. It's like fire. Fire is good in your hearth and bad on your settee. It's still the same fire. So in Harry's world, magic is treated very much like this kind of force. It's just a power that they use. There aren't any particular religious or occult trappings really that go with it. It's just a question of saying the right words in the right time and being the right kind of person to practice it. I think some of the Christian controversy has been interesting in that Harry's story has an awful lot of Christian symbolism. J.K. Rowling is a Christian, and she said that, and her Christianity is far from incidental to the tales. However, when you look at the idea of sacrifice and the idea of giving on to the next generation, all these kind of concepts that come up in the Harry Potter novels, we find those in many cultures of both pagan and Christian traditions. And in the last book, she begins it with quotes from both pagan and Christian traditions. So magic, we can define it a lot of different ways. One of them, to quote Alan Moore, is personal ecology of energy. You can think of the magic of positive thinking that comes into modern psychology. And in a lot of ways, magic, or what we think of as magic, what was thought of as magic in earlier times, is something that's come down and been absorbed by modern psychology. Why should positive thinking make any difference at all? Yet it's generally acknowledged that it does. Hallows of Jen, for Hallows of Jen, am fallig of nagas, gai mir manen fodoski ho, man ham le faljes do, skia, do skia.
Novels are of the place they're written in, and the students at my Edinburgh University course on Harry Potter had all the fun of being able to discuss the novels in the city and sometimes even in the cafes where J.K. Rowling wrote them. When you look out at Edinburgh's spires, which Stevenson said looked more like a drop set in the theatre than a city in the world of man, and you wander around the old town streets where there are shops like this one, the weird shop, where you can get all sorts of magical goods, you could equip yourself near as well as Harry Potter at Diagon Alley. So this atmosphere, somehow, along with J.K. Rowling's own experience, brought the novels to birth. Now, what are these novels about? Why are people so interested? Well, the phenomena of Harry Potter tells us something about what's missing from our culture, and the novels themselves then go on to tell us something about how we fill those cultural and spiritual and even personal voids, what's missing in our lives. And one of the things that's missing is magic. I think we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. Oliphant. On one level, the very name Harry suggests that he's like every man. He represents all of us. And the hero of all these myths and fairy tales is always somebody who is special and is also regular, who is the absolute most ordinary, in Harry's case, abused child, unloved, not having a very nice time of life, who suddenly finds out that he's something more. And this is a message to all of us. I think one of the reasons that Harry Potter's been so popular is that Harry experiences so much loss in his life. He's kind of a poster boy for loss. He's lost his family, he experiences repeated losses of loved ones. Every time he has to return home at the end of the school year at Hogwarts, he experiences loss returning to the awful Dursleys' house. And in a sense, I think many of us do feel lost nowadays. We feel that we've lost all of the things that Harry ultimately returns to and ultimately finds. Friendship, community, a sense of meaning, and a sense of magic in his life. So in this way, Harry speaks to all of us. He's about what all of us can do to return to a state where we feel more at one with everything, whether that's ourselves, our own highest will and what we're meant to do with our lives, our friends, our families, our community, with the natural world and with the spiritual world. So it's about returning to all of that. Now Harry goes through an absolutely hellish process to return to all of it, and it's worth looking at that a little bit. He goes through a process of sacrifice. He loses more and more and more and more things before he finally gets to the place of happiness and joy at the very end of the novels. And this is it's an interesting magical process, and it's an interesting psychological process. And it's part of why Dumbledore doesn't tell him the whole truth. Because for the magic at the end of the series to work, Harry has to enter completely into what I would call the sacrificial posture. He has to withhold absolutely nothing. It's the big let go. And many of us experience this in our lives when, all our machinations aren't making things come out right, and we just have to release to the greater purpose, release to the greater good, and have trust, have faith. Dumbledore's always telling Harry to trust, and it's really hard, because Dumbledore's revealed to be kind of a Machiavellian character. He's revealed to be someone who is very imperfect within himself. In a lot of ways, Dumbledore is like the rebus, the alchemical hermaphrodite that brings together all polarities, light and dark, good and bad. In fact, in Hindu tradition, guru means a light dark. It doesn't mean somebody who's all-knowing or all-wonderful, but it means somebody who has held and reconciled all the polarities, all the good and bad, all the light and dark within themselves. And Dumbledore is very much a person of that sort. So Harry learns to trust Dumbledore and be faithful even unto death, even unto that final walk into the woods. And that's an important lesson to us, because on that final walk into the woods, Harry is listening to every beat of his heart and appreciating every breath that he takes. The samurais used to speak of freshening the mind with the thought of death for that very purpose, so that they could think in the light of the fact that they may be dead that day. What is the most important thing they can do? What is the best way they can live in that context? It's like what the Yaqui shaman Don Juan says to Carlos Castaneda. He said, in a world where death is the hunter, there are no big or small decisions, only those we make in the face of our own inevitable deaths. J.K. Rowling sets up fleeing death as the ultimate evil in her universe on a couple of different levels. Voldemort's name means one who flees death, and Voldemort shows he will do anything to avoid his own personal death. He will kill any number of people, he will corrupt anyone, he will destroy anyone. It does not matter to him. And that is quite a big evil. He's the biggest evil in the books. However, there are lesser evils, and I think one way that she points us at those is by her use of numbers. She uses numerology, the sort of symbolic value of numbers, a lot. Like she uses the number 7 as this sort of eternal magical number. It's one of the most powerful magical numbers, and that's how many volumes she has in the series. Likewise, Voldemort tries to divide his soul into 7 parts, because he thinks 7 is the most magical number, and it also had the reputation of being indestructible, as being a prime number that was only divisible by itself, or 1, so it was kind of indestructible. So he figures if he creates a 7-part soul, that he will then be indestructible. However, he accidentally creates an 8-part soul. 8 is like the infinity symbol. It's the cycles of life and death and rebirth. So he creates a vulnerable soul when he creates an 8-part soul. Now the Dursleys, we are told, live at number 4 Privet Drive. So the Dursleys are sort of like, I think what she's telling us is that the Dursleys are doing something quite similar to what Voldemort is doing. Different only in degree, really. How are the Dursleys fleeing death? Well, how do a lot of people flee death? They buy stuff. It's basically, it reminds me of something Yogi Bhajan said, which is, we buy things as though we would stay here. The Dursleys have their mortgage and have their house and have their conservatory, and Dudley Dursley has his room of broken toys, which could probably serve to save the lives of an African village if you translated it all into money. So I think in the modern consumer culture that she also holds up as an evil, we see that the Dursleys are doing something very similar to what Voldemort's doing, and very similar to actually what we all do, is buying things and, enjoying things in a denial of our own deaths and of our own mortality. Well, how could we do something different? Maybe we just, instead of getting one CD, we spend that money where it could save a life. Instead of buying a cup of coffee out, we bring some coffee and we spend that money where it could save a life. This is also an answer to the really big problem of mortality, the problem of death that we're confronted with throughout the Harry Potter novels. It's an answer in that none of us can know for sure, in a way that's provable to everybody, that our souls are immortal. We may believe this, but we can't know it for sure. So whatever we do spiritually has to have an impact in this physical reality. And one way to immortality is what Nicholas Flamel himself describes. He describes what he did with the stone. And he says that he gives money to orphanages, he helps many ill people, many poor people, he founds hospitals. He does all these things with the money that he gets from the stone. And in that, whether or not he lived to be 665 as he does in the novels, in that good that he does, he lives on. And it's similar with J.K. Rowling. She's done loads of charitable work with the money that she's gotten from the Harry Potter novels, helping children throughout Europe and all that kind of thing. So I think this is one answer to the problem of our mortality, is when we open ourselves up to a bigger reality and doing something that lasts beyond us. In that sense, we can all attain the stone and use it properly. Witchcraft and wizardry both come from old Indo-European root word, wid or wit. Same thing we get wit from. Ravenclaw's diadem says, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." So the wizard or the witch is somebody who uses wisdom, wit, that kind of thing, to bring about magical effects. And what the words wizard and witch tell us is that this isn't just using supernatural power to create change. It tells us that it is using it in the spirit of greater wisdom, of a greater whole. So it's just not mucking about with spiritual powers or mucking about with reality. It's using it with wisdom, with a greater understanding. Alchemy has two strands to it. One strand of alchemy evolved into modern chemistry, and another strand of alchemy evolved into modern spiritual alchemy. Originally, the alchemists conducted physical experiments in which the changes to materials in the alchemical vessel also reflected changes within the alchemist. J.K. Rowling uses many different ancient symbols in the Harry Potter novels, and I think that's one of the important things to remember as we look at them and try and look at deeper layers of meaning in them, is that I'm not trying to read J.K. Rowling's mind in terms of what she put in the novels or what she meant to say necessarily, though I think that there are some clear areas where she's obviously very consciously using symbolism and archetypes and ancient heroic journey themes in very clear ways, very clearly symbolically. But when you sort of pepper novels with winged discs and broomsticks and magical animals and hippogriffs and griffins and all these kind of symbolic things, you can't help but bring along the constellations of meaning that are already around them. The winged disc is a really good example. The golden snitch, as it appears in the novels and in the films, is the thing that the seeker wants to catch. Now, why would he be catching this thing? Well, one of the first things that we can look at is alchemical symbolism. J.K. Rowling tells us very clearly that the series is about alchemy in one way or another, because the first novel is called The Philosopher's Stone, the Sorcerer's Stone in America. The Philosopher's Stone was the thing that the alchemists sought to create, and on the spiritual level really sought to become. It's that divine essence within our own beings, that perfected aspect of the self, which many traditions tell us is just like a crystal within us that only needs to be revealed. We are all already that thing. It's just a question of revealing it within ourselves, of taking away everything that's in the way of that. So we start out with Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and the alchemical symbolism goes throughout the novels. I mean, you've got 7 stages in alchemy in many traditions, and you've got 7 novels. There's a lot of interpretation that's been done about this by Hans Andrea and other people talking about alchemy, John Granger, for example. Anyway, so when we look at symbols, we look at all the layers of meaning that those symbols come with. So there's what, in any kind of work of art or work of literature, there's what the author put in, there's the thing itself, and then there's what the reader takes out of it. And with symbols, the reader can take out a lot of different things. For example, the winged disc that appears in the Harry Potter novels as the golden snitch that the seeker tries to catch. The winged disc appears everywhere from ancient Egypt, Sumer, to alchemy, to many different traditions, modern Masonic traditions, for example. In ancient Egypt, it was a symbol of the young son of the divine family, the god Horus. And Horus defeats the evil Set, who is the person who's killed his father. Set often appears in the form of a serpent, and when Horus defeats him, he's often in the form of a young child. So that's an interesting parallel with the Harry Potter stories. In modern Zoroastrian tradition, the winged disc in a particular form, like the image of Ashur, where there's a winged disc with a person in it, often represents the choice to live a righteous life, to turn in the right direction, to do the right thing. Later on in alchemy, the winged disc becomes a symbol for both the Philosopher's Stone, the final culmination of the alchemical process, and the prima materia, the beginning of the alchemical process. So Harry becoming a seeker at the very beginning, And then at the very end of the novels, that snitch that he catches in his first Quidditch game is returned to him in the context of the resurrection of the dead and the fulfillment of his own destiny. So you've got a lovely set of bookends there, with the golden snitch that represents the goal, the beginning and the goal of the alchemical process, and the choice to take a righteous action, and also the solar disk at the moment of eclipse. So it's the idea of the light still shining in the darkness. All of that is neatly wrapped up in that symbol of the winged disc, which becomes the golden snitch, which Harry ultimately catches in his moment of sacrifice at the end. In the three friends, Harry, Ron and Hermione, we can see the three alchemical elements. Hermione is the easiest. She's named for Hermes, which is also Mercury, which is sort of the primal element in alchemy, and in some ways it stands for all of alchemy itself. It stands for all the resolved polarities. Mercury holds a caduceus with two serpents wrapping around it and a winged disc at the top, which represents this idea of uniting every possible polarity. And so J.K. Rowling says they couldn't do it without Hermione. Now, am I sure Hermione is Mercury? Well, yeah. Because her initials are Hg, which is actually Mercury in the periodic table of elements, and her parents are dentists. Think mercury fillings. So we're safe in assuming Hermione's Mercury. We're also safe in assuming that Ron is the alchemical sulfur. Now, sulfur is the sort of fiery, transmuting element, and the alchemical salt is transformed by the actions of these two substances, mercury and sulfur, that are oftentimes at war with each other, or are described as being so within the alchemical vessel. So that describes really well how Ron and Hermione act on Harry. They each have different kinds of influences on Harry and help Harry in different kinds of ways. Harry himself is the alchemical salt, the salt of the earth. Initially it's described as being a blood-red substance, which through the alchemical process becomes a white substance called the salt of wisdom. Now, in a way, the relationship of the alchemical salt to the stone is very simple. The alchemical salt and the stone are identical. It's as though the salt is already the stone, but it doesn't know it yet. In a way, it's like what my teacher said, my teacher Rudy Bauer said, in that spirit is given and soul we create. In this analogy, the initial salt, the alchemical salt, is like spirit, and the purified, finished philosopher's stone is like the soul. He looked out over the ocean and felt closer this dawn than ever before, closer to the heart of it all. J.K. Rowling. The spirit has its homeland, which is the realm of the meaning of things. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Many people say that their happiest childhood memories are playing on the beach, building sandcastles. Harry didn't have a lot of those kind of memories, and yet he did have something that made him both a great person and a great wizard. He had his mother's love during that all-important first year of his life. And a lot of therapists and psychologists tell us that this is where we kind of get imprinted with the idea of what's possible and what's not in the universe. When a baby and a mother are really in tune, there is almost a magically responsive universe that the baby experiences. The mother's breast fills just as he's hungry, and the mother is present for him in every way, just as he needs her to be. So such a baby grows up feeling that the world is magically responsive to his needs. It gives him a faith in love and a faith in the world and a faith in life. And in Harry's case, of course, it also gives him a faith in magic, in the idea that the universe can respond, which is part of why he's a greater person and a greater wizard than Voldemort is. Because Voldemort misses out on that first year. He never has that experience of love that Dumbledore tells us is so important. And I think one of the most important things about the Harry Potter novels is the fact that at their heart, Harry is an orphaned and abused child. And J.K. Rowling, in her own work, her charitable work, has done a lot of work to help children in Romania and in the rest of Europe that are experiencing this kind of abuse and unloving time of growing up. And I think that's one of the most important things that Harry can say to our culture, is the importance of those first few years of love that every child needs and deserves. Carl Jung talks a lot about synchronicity, the idea that sometimes things just happen at exactly the right time in the right way, in a way that we wouldn't necessarily expect. And it's the same sort of thing that Joseph Campbell talks about. It especially often happens when we're following what I would call our true will, that important quality that Slytherin has. The true will that we can see as either the will of our own truest self or the will of the divine within us. And will is not whim. It's not what we fancy. So on that level, our true will could actually be that something really difficult happened to us, or really challenging, because that will call us to be our highest self. That certainly happens to Harry. And there's been a lot of controversy about how Dumbledore puts Harry through absolute hellishness. Now, was Dumbledore unethical to do that? Well, I don't think so. Because Harry over and over again says that he is willing to do whatever it takes to defeat Voldemort. And Dumbledore knows that telling him the unvarnished truth is not going to get him where he needs to be to defeat Voldemort. So Dumbledore does exactly what he has to do at each stage. It helps also to think of Dumbledore as an archetypal figure. He is the kingly figure, he is the king of Hogwarts. And when I was speaking at Oxford at the conference at Magdalen College, the Accio Harry Potter conference, and I was on a round table on pagan and Christian themes in Harry Potter with Ronald Hutton, Professor Ronald Hutton from Bristol, and Hans Andrea, who has the Harry Potter for Seekers website. And when we were discussing about Harry, one of the things that Ronald Hutton did was to put Harry in context as the young hero going out to win his spurs. And the king, of course, puts the young hero in danger, because that is what young heroes are for. They exist to be endangered. It certainly would be a lot less interesting series of books if Dumbledore put Harry to bed with a nice cup of cocoa. But one of the things that is there for Harry, as it's there for all of us at these difficult moments, is when we're following our true will, when we're following what, for example, Joseph Campbell might have called following our bliss. He says doors open for us where we didn't think there'd be doors, and there wouldn't be doors for anyone else. One such door in the Harry Potter novels is the Room of Requirement, and it appears equipped with whatever the seeker needs to fulfill what they need to do. In the end of the novel series, it becomes a sort of a hangout for all the people who are fighting Voldemort, and it becomes also a place for Dumbledore's army to practice when the Ministry interferes and prevents them from learning how to defend themselves and to fight magically. So we all have that room of requirement, I think, that appears at the right time if we put ourselves in the right state of mind to receive it. It's a bit like a spy having sealed orders. The spy might have the information, go to the park bench and ask the old lady if her roses are blooming, and then he might get an answer back. And he doesn't necessarily know anything of what the answer means at that time, but he's doing what he needs to do at the next step. So in some sense, I think that Spirit, deity, God, our own true will, however you want to think of it, gives us those sealed orders. And if we follow the instincts of our truest heart and just get where we need to be, we find that the door of the Room of Requirement is there to open before us, to give us what we need. In the final novel, Harry hears the story of the three brothers, which tells about how the Deathly Hallows come to be. In the story, there are three brothers trying to cross a river, which is very treacherous and deadly. They build a magical bridge to cross it, but Death becomes angry at them because he's been cheated of their lives. Death meets them halfway across the bridge, which is often where most of us encounter our real fear of death. Halfway through our lives, we wake up at 3 in the morning, realizing that this death thing isn't just academic, it's something that's actually going to happen to us. So the three brothers encounter Death, and Death, instead of being overtly vengeful, says, "Oh, I'll offer you 3 boons because you've been so clever as to trick me." So one of the brothers requests an unbeatable wand with which he could duel anybody to the death. The other brother requests a stone with which he can resurrect the dead. The third brother, the youngest and the wisest, as is often true in fairy tales, requests simply a gift from Death that will allow him to escape death without being followed or observed. So Death has no choice but to give him his very own invisibility cloak. Now, the first 2 brothers, one of them is immediately boasting about the wand that he has and is of course killed for it. The next brother resurrects from the dead a woman that he loved, but she's sort of half there and half not, and was actually happier in the spirit world where she had been before, so he eventually dies from despair. The third brother lives out all his days, and finally, when he's ready, passes on the invisibility cloak to his own son, and leaves with Death as an equal and as a friend. Now, the symbol of the Deathly Hallows is a triangle representing the invisibility cloak, a circle representing the resurrection stone, and a line representing the death stick or the deadly wand. Now, you can look at symbols like that in a lot of different ways, but I would look at them in this context as the stone representing union. After all, the brother sought union with the woman he loved who had died. The line representing division or loss, and the death stick, the deadly wand, the unbeatable wand, was an instrument of loss and death. And the triangle actually represents a state in between these two, but a state that can also hold these two. The triangle represents a transcendent state of spiritual awareness, going by different names in a lot of different traditions. And this state of awareness enables us to hold the experiences of union and loss without either experiencing union desperately and clingingly, and experiencing loss without collapsing into despair. So it's the ability to hold the polarities of life. Now, when Harry puts on the invisibility cloak, at first he feels this wonderful sense of expansion. That's what a lot of us feel when we first enter an alternate state of consciousness. He feels that all of Hogwarts is open to him in this cape. And then he's immediately confronted with the 2 spectres on the spiritual path, with fear when he opens a forbidden book in the library and it screams at him and he drops it. Then he's running from Filch and he hides in a room and he encounters the mirror of Erised, the mirror of desire. So immediately he's confronted with the fear of both something frightening and screaming at you and the fear of discovery, and the spectre of desire, which in his case, what he most deeply desires is the love and connection with his parents and all his family members who he has lost. So the triangle is the transcendent aspect. It's the aspect that is like the pyramid that's based in heaven, based in earth and pointing to heaven. It's that transcendent aspect that enables us to hold all of these polarities. Because it's said that people are never happy. It's said that we're not happy when we're happy because we're afraid it's going to end, and we're not happy when we're unhappy because obviously we're unhappy. The transcendent triangle of spiritual awareness allows us to ground ourselves in a different state of awareness that is well beyond situational happiness. And in that state, like Harry, we can journey and experience lots of different things, acquire spiritual wisdom, and do things we otherwise wouldn't be able to. J.K. Rowling says that she intentionally made each of the houses correspond to one of the 4 elements of ancient tradition that we find both in alchemy and in ritual magic. These are earth, air, fire, and water. Hufflepuff, with its totemic or heraldic badger, is associated with the element of earth and the earthy qualities of loyalty and being hardworking. Ravenclaw is associated with air, the kind of higher mental qualities, and indeed Ravenclaw is the most intellectual house. Its symbol is the eagle that soars above everything, and its common room and its dormitories are in one of the towers. The other tower is occupied by Gryffindor, and Gryffindor's symbol is the lion, and it's associated with fire and the quality of bravery. And finally we have Slytherin House, and Slytherin is also in the lower part of the castle, but it's actually beneath the lake, and the colours are green and silver, and it's associated with the serpent. So of course Slytherin is associated with water. Severus Snape, who's the head of Slytherin House for most of the novels, is also the potions master, so that's associating him with the cauldron and with that element of water again. Now, what deeper meanings are there within these 4 houses? Well, one thing I noticed right away was that you can associate the houses each with a magical precept. There are 4 magical precepts that go back a long way, and these are to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. I immediately saw the idea that Hufflepuff, associated with the element of earth, is associated also with silence. You can say as silent as the grave, for example. So this element of earth is often associated with silence. And also in the novels, the idea of loyalty is often associated with keeping silent. Peter Pettigrew, when he betrays Harry's parents, basically spills his guts to Voldemort. He doesn't keep a secret when he should have done. So oftentimes in the novels, the failure to keep silent is associated with disloyalty. So that's quite easy with Hufflepuff. Now, Gryffindor obviously is to dare, bravery. So this is an important aspect in magic, is to be able to be daring enough to actually do what you need to do, in the same kind of way that it's important to be able to keep silent and not brag or boast about what you might have accomplished magically. So that's 2 of the precepts. To know is obviously Ravenclaw. And again, it's the idea that what you do has to come from gnosis, from knowledge, but not just any kind of knowledge, but the personal knowledge, the personal experience of the divine. Not just what people say, but what you might experience for your own self. Now, the trickiest one to see for many people might be Slytherin. What on earth is the positive characteristic of Slytherin? For one thing, I would say first, is it's important to note that all of these qualities have their positives and negatives. Daring can see you leading, into rash action, like Harry does oftentimes in the books. While Hufflepuff are hardworking, they can also be thought of as a bunch of duffers. They can be a bit too earthy. Ravenclaw, knowledge can be misused. Things can get too airy-fairy, things can get too disconnected from reality, and some of the Ravenclaws, like Luna Lovegood, for example, can be just a little bit out there. Finally, when we come to Slytherin, we think about will. Well, what is the magical quality of will? Slytherin is thought of as being cunning and ambitious. Slytherin people are very, very ambitious. So what's ambition? The will to succeed. Well, take away the qualifier. It's will. It's that pure, unadulterated, magical will, which many people say is the absolute most important quality in a magician, in a wizard of any kind. And it is true will. It's not whim. It's not doing what you feel like doing. It's taking the time to go through the alchemical process to burn away everything that is not that true divine will within you. What Joseph Campbell talked about is following your bliss. That divinely inspired will. And we see in the head of Slytherin House, in Severus Snape, a perfect manifestation of that quality of Slytherin will. He has a powerful enough will that he can keep Voldemort, who's the greatest legilimens that ever existed, the greatest mind reader, he can keep Voldemort out of his head. He has a great enough will that he can follow through on his love for Lily, Harry's mother and protect Harry all through his life and try and work to preserve Harry, even though he doesn't particularly even like Harry. So Severus Snape demonstrates that quality of will throughout all of the novels.
We're in St Andrew's Square in Edinburgh by a statue of the Lion of Scotland by Ronald Ray. So it's fitting that J.K. Rowling gave Gryffindor, the house of Harry Potter, the lion as its totemic or heraldic symbol.
Remember, if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy, remember what happened to a boy who was good and kind and brave, because he strayed across the path of Lord Voldemort. Remember Cedric Diggory. Albus Dumbledore. The difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would suffice to change the world. Mahatma Gandhi. In Scottish tradition, you often hear about people entering the spirit world, the realm of the Shida, by going betwixt and between. And when Harry enters the magical realm at platform 9 3/4, he's obviously between platform 9 and 10. And he has to go through a concrete barrier. And I think that's the barrier for a lot of us in terms of getting in touch with a magical or spiritual aspect of reality. It's the barrier of the concrete. We think that what's physically there in front of us is all that there is. Now, if you close your eyes for a moment and think about, for example, somebody that you love, and you have your feelings for that person, is that real or is that imaginary? Your feelings are certainly real. The person exists somewhere, and yet they're not physically before you at this time. In Gaelic, the word for imagination is Mac Mean Mana, which means son of spirit. And this is the idea that imagination is actually an in-breathing from spirit. It's not something that originates in the little grey cells in our minds. What I always tell people when I'm teaching shamanism is to allow yourself to have the imaginative experience, to allow yourself to just play with the idea, like a child might play, with the idea that there are more realities than this physical one, and allow it to prove itself to you. I think if we're honest, we've all had experiences of this kind of reality. I mean, for example, have you ever known what mood your partner or your parent was in when they walked in the room, even though you didn't see them and even though they didn't say anything? Have you ever walked into the room where people had just had a quarrel You know, people say tension hung thick in the air. Well, there isn't actually anything in the air that you can see, and yet you can tell that something has gone on. So we all often have these intuitions, but we also often disregard them and say, well, that's just my imagination. Well, to that I'd just refer back to the Gallic, that imagination is actually the son of spirit. It was, he thought, the difference between being dragged into the arena to face a battle to the death and walking into the arena with your head held high. Some people, perhaps, would say there was little to choose between the two ways, but Dumbledore knew, and so do I, thought Harry, with a rush of fierce pride, and so did my parents, but there was all the difference in the world. Harry Potter. The modern hero, the modern individual who dares to heed the call and seek the mansion of that presence with whom it is our whole destiny to be atoned, cannot, indeed must not, wait for his community to cast off its slough of pride, fear, rationalized avarice, and sanctified misunderstanding. Live, Nietzsche says, as though the day were here. Joseph Campbell. There are fairy tales and myths to help guide us at all stages of our lives. There are also myths that appear to guide us through specific points in history, messages that come just at the right time to set us on the right course. As I've said, the Harry Potter phenomenon tells us a lot about Western culture lacks at the beginning of the 21st century, and the books go some way to showing us how to fill those voids. I've shown some of the ways that Harry's story resonates magically, morally, and symbolically with ancient wisdom, and I hope I've also shown the value of this wisdom today. Harry Potter gives us insights into the magic and meaning of our lives, and we can use his example as an alchemical antidote to the culture of complacency that we find ourselves in. We fully attain the stone by giving to others as Harry does. We multiply our wealth by focusing it where it will do the most good, where a cup of coffee, the cost of a cup of coffee, saves a life. By doing so, we extend our lives' impact in time and show that love is stronger than death. Harry's greatest message is love's generosity in the face of loss. We can be as generous to the future as he is, experiencing ourselves as part of that caravan in time, going back from the ancestors and to our descendants. We can follow our ancestors up ahead as he follows his parents' positive examples. We can love and support the children who glide away from us into a magical future. We can experience our world as inspiring and inspirited along the way. Doing so, we can meet the most apparently insurmountable challenges, and for us, as for Harry and his loved ones, all will be well. A philosopher acts not what nature does, for nature, where she rules, forms all vegetables, animals, and minerals in their own degrees. Men do not, after the same sort, by their arts make natural things. When nature has finished her work about them, then by our art are they made more perfect. Nicholas Flamel. Memory, prophecy, and fantasy, the past, the future, and the dreaming moment between, are all one country, living one immortal day. To know that is wisdom, to use it is the art. Clive Barker. Ate Malkuth Vegebra Vegedula Leolam. Amen. Yod Heh Adonai Akala. Raphael before me, Gabriel behind me, Michael to my right, Uriel to my left. Before me flame the pentagrams, in the column of light that I am shines the six-rayed star. Ate, Malkuth, Vegebra, Vegedula, Leolam. Amen. Ispridion hith virain hirudem nisid hugirani. Iadrusai hith virain meine gorida hidhatni. Ispridion hiava virudem disit hogirani. Iadrusa hiava meine gorida hidhatni. Ispridion hirogle virudem disit hogirani. Iadrusa hirogle meine gorida hidhatni.
Jan Herofellin Hirudumni Sidugirani Yadrusai Herofellin Meine Gorida Hihatni Mama kriya hodor Gora hekichwinu Dihai nion, kachrodov labravar, dihai ga, brusknov vergavar, dihai gachlas, rodov lohavar.